Very quickly before we get into the video, there is work currently going on around me, so if there's banging noises, I do apologize, but I can't really do anything about it. Hello there, lovely people, it's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and yes, I've actually played Monster Hunter Stories 2, Wings of Ruin. My god, it's been so long since I've actually been able to play a game for a so-called preview, it takes me back. So yes, I've played a good chunk of it. Obviously, I'm very limited on what I can talk about, but there's still a good amount that I can talk about, and I'm going to talk about it to you. This is only early impressions. This is not representative of the full game, nor should this be taken as a review because it isn't. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. So if you're not familiar with Monster Hunter Stories as a whole, which I wasn't entirely, I did play the original again in a sort of a preview event back when those actually happened, and I enjoyed my time with it, but I was also playing a load of other games at the time, and I remember chunks, but the Switch was already out by that point, so I wasn't really paying a tremendous amount of attention, I'm sorry to say, and I never ended up getting the full game, so I was really pleased to get this one and play it. Rather than playing as a monster hunter, you play as a rider, and hunters do exist in the game. They pop up and everything, and they're like, oh, they're quite different, and sometimes, you know, the riders and the hunters don't always entirely get along because they have, you know, quite different philosophies. For example, the hunters, they go out and kill monsters. The riders, they go out and kill monsters with monsters. As the name would suggest, you ride on the back of monsters, or monsties as they're referred to when they're kind of friendly, and you take them into battle and all that sort of thing. And this time around, rather than being a sort of an action-based combat thing that is Monster Hunter, instead it is a turn-based RPG. You control your primary character, mine of which has been based on my partner Sasha, because I fancied a change. She's still called Alex though, because I like to be referred to properly. And whilst you control your character in combat and out in the world and everything, you don't control your monstie, and sometimes you get like partners and they also have their own monstie and stuff like that, but that's details. Now, anyone who saw my Miitopia review would immediately think, oh, Alex doesn't like that then. He doesn't like not being able to control, you know, the other characters and only having one. Honestly, it's not so bad in this game by any stretch, to the point that I actually kind of like it. It makes more sense thematically, you know, you're not controlling your monster, although to be fair, you can select certain like special moves. I've forgotten the name of them now. I think it's skills, and so you can direct your monstie to use certain attacks. It's not controlling them every turn, but if you do want to set up something a little bit more strategic, you have the freedom to do that. You're not just relying on them, hoping to do the right thing, which is very nice. And it's important because the combat, I mean, I'm not the biggest turn-based RPG, you know, sort of typical JRPG fan. You know, I enjoy them from time to time, and, you know, sort of like certainly back in the day, I really enjoyed like Final Fantasy 3. But as the years have gone on, I've generally gravitated towards different styles of games. Actually, I really like this, like, I really like it a lot. The mechanics that they use are, I don't want to say they're simple, because they are and they aren't. You can attack using a power move, a technical move, or a speed move, and it's kind of like a rock, paper, scissors kind of thing. You know, power beats technical, technical beats speed, and speed beats power, which maybe makes sense, I'm not entirely sure, but you know, sort of you have this sort of thing and you can use any one of those three and so can the enemy, and there's also defensive, but that's not an attack, is it? The reasoning behind this is that the enemy attacks as well, and if you attack each other, it's not like one attacks then the other. If you're both sort of aiming to attack each other, which it shows you what enemy monsters, if they're targeting you, it will show that, which is really nice, so you can be a lot more tactical about it. It'll show you that, and then you can sort of think, okay, well, I'm fighting a Velocidrome, they generally tend to prefer speed attacks, and so you think, I'll use a technical, and then you get a head-to-head, and if you win the head-to-head, you attack, and the enemy doesn't, which is a tactical masterstroke. It also goes deeper, where if your monstie is also targeting the same monster that you are, and that enemy is focused on you or your monstie, and you use the same, like, type of attack, you can then do, like, a combined attack, and the enemy doesn't get a chance. There's not even a head-to-head. It's just whoosh, because you go around it. You whoosh, like that, and you attack the monster. It's a good time. And it's all sort of like little things, and on their own, each one of them doesn't make a major difference. But, you know, when you put them all together, you actually end up with what is, I would say, a surprisingly tactical experience. It's not like, you know, sort of layers and layers deep by any means, at least not what I've played, but it is honestly one of the best sort of turn-based JRPGs that I've played in a long time. Like, you know, things like Bravely Default. I like that game, but I can't deny that the sort of the Brave and the default system, it didn't really open things up tactically in the way I wanted to, whilst these systems do. And it also goes further with things like you can ride your monster when your kinship meter gets to maximum, and kinship's also used to use special skills, which vary depending on the weapon you've got as well. It's a lot deeper than it seems at first. And further from that, every enemy is resistant or weak to certain types of weapon, and you can switch between them once per turn, but it doesn't take up your turn or anything like that. You can have a slashing weapon, you can have a piercing weapon, and you can have a blunt weapon. And again, as I've said before, some are resistant to some and weak to others, and it swaps around. And so when you fight a monster for the first time, you gotta work this stuff out, and you know, you switch, oh no, I'll try a blunt one, and oh no, maybe it's weak to range and I haven't unlocked that yet. The end result is battles that are genuinely really fun and quite intense. You also have this slightly peculiar system of like lives. You have 3 hearts at the bottom of the screen, and if you or your monstie loses all their HP, you lose a heart. And it's just like Monster Hunter, you know, you have 3 lives, as it were. If you lose all your hearts, thereby losing all your HP 3 times, or your monstie once and you twice, or any combination like that, it's like, you failed, oh no, and you sort of think, well, that sounds awfully easy, but that carries on. When you're out in the field, you retain the same number of hearts, so if you've lost one, you're going to continue, and you can go back to town and get them back up again, but if you're out in the field and you want to continue, or you're in a monster den, which we'll get onto in a second, I have realized I just dove right into the combat without giving maybe any more context. You want to stay there, you want to carry on, you don't want to lose all your hearts, and you want to stay in the den because there might be a great monster at the end, because yes, it's kind of like a big sort of open exploration type game, which hopefully you've seen from some of the footage that I've put up, and you just run around and you can fight enemies, kind of like, not random encounters because you're choosing to encounter them, but they can also run up to you and all that stuff, and then you can find monster dens, which are basically like kind of like mini dungeons almost. I mean, they're very simple, and I don't know for a fact, but I get a feeling that either there's a selection that it can randomly pick from, or they're randomly generated, probably the former. You find your way through, or you just kind of weave your way sneaky-like, and you get to the end and you find a monster nest, and inexplicably, there's usually one monster guarding it, and a load of different monster eggs inside the nest, and you can go through and pick up, oh, what's this egg, and you've got this little companion called Naviru, who I have mixed feelings about. But you pick up the egg and he will say whether it's light or it's heavy, or, you know, sort of whether it smells good or not, and that's a vague indication as to whether it's a good egg. And no matter the egg that you pick up, I believe you're always going to get a monstie out of it, because you can hatch them and then ride the monstie, because you're good like that. And you can even ride an Aptonoth, which is basically my life's goal. It definitely has kind of like a little bit of Pokemon DNA in there, with you know, hatching the eggs and everything, and they're kind of, I suppose in some regards, kind of a gacha mechanic. It is and it isn't, because it does kind of give you indication of what's going to be in there, and, you know, sort of like the pattern on the egg displays what it's going to be. It's pretty obvious. When you start recognizing the patterns, you can go, aha, Velocidrome, aha, Yian-Kut-Kool. You raise them in a stable, you take them out in battles, they get XP, they level up, you know, all very standard stuff. But you know what? It's really bloody good. It's definitely more random than Pokemon. I mean, you can do certain things to kind of like increase your chances. Like, you can find a monster out in the field and encourage it to flee rather than die when you defeat it by like throwing a painberry at it, and for some reason that makes it much more likely to retreat, and then you can follow it because you can put a painberry on it, you can follow it back to its den, and you go to the den, and you know, your likelihood of getting that monster in an egg is probably higher. That's what the game suggests. I haven't delved into the code myself, but in terms of a core gameplay loop and a general sort of like sense of everything, I'm really enjoying it. I'm enjoying it more. I hoped I was really going to enjoy it because I love Monster Hunter, but at the same time, turn-based JRPGs, you know, typical JRPGs, not enormously my bag, but I was really pleasantly surprised by this one. So if it's not entirely your thing, maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised as well. Fingers crossed. But let's talk about the setting a little bit and like the graphics and all that thing and the characters and the cutscenes. The cutscenes are wonderful. They're fully voice acted. There's a lot of voice acting in it, actually. Not everywhere, you know, you'll have dialogue with characters and they'll just sit there flapping their gums silently, which I'm fine with. I don't think you need full voice acting across the board. I don't, you know, it's not necessary, especially with this amount of text, and there would be characters that wouldn't say anything because they're too minor, or you would have to voice them, and then everyone sounds the same, like in Oblivion. But the characters are overall really good fun. I really enjoyed the Elder character. He's a Wyverian, which took me an embarrassing amount of time to work out when I finally saw a shot of him only having 3 fingers. That was, yeah, embarrassing. But there's one character who... yeah, it's Naviru. I don't get along with Naviru. Is it Naviru or Naviru? I'm not sure. My instinct wants to go to Naviru, and I don't know why. Naviru is a feline, and he's not like other feline, and yeah, you're not wrong. I have very mixed feelings about him. He looks really different, and if that was kind of like the style of felines in the game, I mean, I would be more annoyed because I don't like him visually, but you know, it's not. Like, all the other felines look different. They look much more like standard felines. And I don't understand the logic. Maybe there is a reason behind it that was in Monster Hunter Stories 1, but I don't know. All I do know is that his voice is really quite irritating, and he constantly makes cat puns. And I know that's very typical for felines, but generally you don't hear them spoken in English. It's usually just meow and written down, and for some reason that's, I don't know, it's a little bit more subtle. It's a little bit more sort of ha 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 when you see it written down, but when you hear just this very sort of typical sort of Saturday morning TV children's kid program character going possum all the time and making really like grating cat puns about everything and like partners, and it just gets on my nerves. He reminds me of a cross between Bubsy and Buster Baxter from Arthur, which is a weird combination, but I've spoiled it for you now as well. It is just a personal thing though, and realistically most of the time when he comes up it's just text at the bottom and he kind of acts like your voice, and it's fine, you know, it's fine. It's just when he speaks aloud I just don't care for it. It's just, he's the comic relief and it's the style of comedy I don't really find funny, so I was never gonna win. The rest of the game visually though, oh, it's pretty alright. Oh, it is such a pretty game. They've gone for this sort of cel-shaded style, you know, sort of reminiscent of things like the Wind Waker and stuff like that. I mean, it's not the same art style, don't get me wrong, but that, you know, cel shading, and it looks glorious. Yeah, you know, the textures aren't particularly high resolution or anything like that. I mean, sometimes they're alright, but generally they're, you know, a little bit spotty here and there, but it works within the context of the art style. And as a result, as much as I love Monster Hunter Rise, I think visually, Monster Hunter Stories 2 is a lot more striking. And it's just lovely to look at. Performance is a bit of a different area. For some reason, I'm only assuming because I'm pretty sure this is coming to PC as well, eventually. It has an uncapped frame rate rather than being locked at 30, so sometimes you can get areas where it's 60 frames a second, but it's so infrequent that it's absolutely pointless. It's generally sort of hovering between about, I would say, between about 25 and maybe 35 or 40, give or take. I haven't actually analysed any footage, I'm just going on my gut. We'll say, for argument's sake, a rough 30 frames a second. It's not very consistent, I'm not gonna lie. But overall, because it's kind of like a turn-based thing on the most part, it doesn't really affect gameplay. It's just a little bit jarring here and there when you go into like a tight corridor where you're not actually looking at much and the game's not rendering a great deal, when all of a sudden the frame rate just goes whoop. It's weird. It's weird. I do sort of wish they would just cap it at 30 rather than having those strange instances. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd love it if the entire game was 60 frames a second, but we got to be realistic here. And I think in these instances, a locked frame rate just maybe a little bit better. I said locked, I meant capped. Locked would be even better. From what little I've played, I've really enjoyed the game. I'm really keen to play even more of it and just find out more about the world, the story, and things like that. I haven't really touched on the story because I kind of want to sort of steer clear of all of that. It's pretty good though, although I've only had a very small taste of it. It feels very much like it ties in with the Monster Hunter world as a whole. It doesn't feel like it's going against anything or, you know, sort of trying to rewrite the book or anything. It's, you know, sort of, there is sort of slight ethical issues with the riders being sort of a little bit high and mighty over the hunters, even though they do exactly the same thing. But it's a video game, and it's nice, and the monsters that you have seem happy, so I'm probably talking nonsense. You don't necessarily need to kill every Apteroth you find, though. If I were to put this on a scale of not excited at all to very excited, I'd give this a pretty damn excited and intrigued. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you take that subscribe button, pick it up and take it to a stable, hatch it and see what comes out. Probably nothing. It's not an egg. And be sure to check out NintendoLife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo-related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye-bye.